Each year, the National Federation of Independent Business releases a report on the state of small businesses around the country, including the more than 500,000 small businesses that operate in Arizona. The new report is out, and here to talk about it is Chad Heinrich, NFIB's State Director. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ted.
What is the state of small business in Arizona?
Well, Ted, small business is actually big business in Arizona. We employ over 1 million people within our small business community in Arizona, over 600,000 small businesses in the state. And actually that translates to about 40 to 42% of our entire state workforce. So usually my message is that small business is big in Arizona. Small businesses are doing well, but there are always headwinds as a small business. We've got issues with labor. We've got issues with our expenses in general, and costs are increasing. And we tend to see inflation and labor quality as being really the top issues that small businesses tell us in our regular surveys.
And I want to get to those in a second here, but as far as what you're seeing and hearing from small business owners, I mean, are you hearing the same thing over and over again?
Well, there has been a theme. Really, since the pandemic, it's been difficult to find qualified workers, and that impacts our ability to hire. So in our most recent report that you mentioned, I believe the number was 14% of our small business owners look to hire in the next 3 months. And that's typically a question we ask. The problem with that number is it has not been that low since May of 2020, which you can imagine, the year of the pandemic, that was a fairly low number. And so we're not encouraged by seeing that.
What's going on out there? Why is that? Why is it so difficult? I mean, the minimum wage right now is pretty significant. I mean, it's up there, and you would think that people looking for work would say, that's not so bad. I think I'll take. What's going on?
Well, I think there's a lot of different factors going on. When we look at entry-level jobs, as you mentioned, the minimum wage is at $14.35. Just in the last 2 years, because we peg the minimum wage increases to inflation, we've seen a 14% increase in what's required to be paid on the minimum wage. And so for the young employees, for the employees that are entering the workforce without any experience, it's really tough for a small business owner to pay that wage to someone who has no experience. So there may be a little bit of give and take on the entry-level jobs, but on the experienced workers, that's where we're also having a problem, because our small businesses are telling us, I have these job openings, I want to fill them, but I'm not able to find a qualified worker for that job.
Wow, okay, and you got that combined with inflation, I would imagine. Inflation, the cost of supplies, the cost of doing business, it's got to be going up.
Yeah, inflation was a real concern about a year ago, and from our surveys, and we've done these monthly since 1974, I believe, from our members. So we're hearing constantly on these particular issues. Inflation was a real issue about a year ago. That seems to be taking a second spot now to the labor quality concern. So those are typically have been our top two concerns in the last 24 months.
What about sales numbers? How are they trending?
Sales numbers are good, but there's limitations there as well, because if you can't open the shop doors and you can't run the business with qualified employees, it's hard to commit those. But consumer spending is really driving the economy.
And I'm going to ask you about optimism here in a second, but capital outlay is kind of an expression of optimism. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing along those lines?
Kind of the same trend there, a little trepidation from small business owners. Small businesses are different than big businesses, right? So big businesses have more resources to do capital expenditures. Small business owners, typically, it is 100% on the owner of the business's back to expand their business. So they're looking at potentially borrowing money. We have higher interest rates that can prevent them from doing that. So there's a lot of factors that going into that number on capital, because the owner has all their skin in the game.
Right. And as far as optimism, I know the National Business Optimism Index, it was down last month. Mm-hmm. Arizona, same kind. I mean, is it down by a lot? Is the gloomy gust situation out there? What's going on?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that, Ted. I think the economy is in pretty good shape. Small business owners are used to these problems. The issues that our surveys are showing are similar issues that we see on a monthly basis. The issue is that they are increasing in severity. So I oftentimes call these surveys kind of a canary in the coal mine,
Right.
because the small business owners that are reporting to us are the ones right on the front lines.
Yeah, and it's all happening in a hot economy as well. How do you square that?
That is a question for someone probably higher than my pay grade. It would be great to have an economist on and try to give you their view, but if you have 3 economists in the room,
Right.
how many are actually going to come to an agreement on that?
Well, we talk about the hot economy. Has the optimism shown a little bit less of a decline because of things improving pretty much across the board, except for inflation and things like?
Yeah.
But it sounds like businesses are going great guns out there for the most part.
Yeah, the businesses that are able to find their employees, have their quality employees as part of their business, and really have the ability to invest and expand their businesses during these times. These are great opportunities for small businesses. But remember, that small business owner they might be the one that's writing the check, paying the employees. They're also opening the shop in the morning. They're locking it up at night. Up in Flagstaff, they're scooping snow off of the sidewalks. They're doing everything. So they're trying to balance a lot of different factors.
With that in mind, I know you spent a lot of time down at the Capitol. What are you seeing from the legislature so far, and what do you want to see?
Well, thankfully in Arizona, we have had a history of a pro-small business legislature, and actually the people of Arizona have supported small businesses in a lot of ways. So from a tax perspective, it requires two-thirds of the legislature to increase taxes. The voters just last election cycle raised the bar to 60% to increase taxes on the ballot. So that's great on the tax front, really trying to keep taxes under control there. The risk that we see is, how can the legislature impact our cost of doing business? So we pay attention to things like mandates on the health insurance industry, mandates on the workers' compensation insurance, or potentially unemployment insurance. And those are cost drivers for small business. So we want to keep the legislation that impacts those programs to a minimum from a cost perspective, just to try to control costs.
Gotcha. Chad Heinrich, National Federation of Independent Business. Good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.